Well, thank you everybody for being here. Before we start, I want to make sure you're all fueled up for the presentation. So there is an Infleqtion branded candy bar.
Love it.
Excellent.
Great.
Chris, an
Thank you, sir.
Infleqtion
Appreciate
candy bar.
that.
Should we throw
Dawn,
this into the crowd?
an Infleqtion
Great,
branded
yeah.
candy
Thank you.
bar. And those could all be yours, an Infleqtion branded candy bar, if you come visit us at our booth. So now that we have our energy for the conversation, let's dive in.
All right.
So we do this panel at an interesting time in history. The national security landscape is being reshaped by rapid advances in technology. Adversaries are adapting faster, and threats don't live in silos anymore. They surround us from cyber to electronic warfare, autonomous systems, and space. They're all colliding in unpredictable ways. And now quantum technology enters the picture as a set of unique capabilities that will fundamentally change how we defend our nation, how we detect and deter our adversaries, and how we operate in contested environments. And the stakes are high. It is a race. And the same breakthroughs that promise revolutionary advantages for the US and our allies could also be turned against us if we don't act quickly enough. So I'm very, very, very lucky to be joined today by three amazing panelists. All three of these folks, Dawn, Laura, and Chris, have spent truly decades singularly focused on how to make the world a safer place. And having the privilege of working closely with all three of these individuals, I know I personally sleep a little better at night, knowing that we have folks like them working around the clock to keep us safe. So actually, even before I introduce them, let's give them a round of applause. Thank you guys for everything that you do. And again, sleep better at night knowing that we have you watching our backs. So let's start with Dawn. Dawn, first of all, I have the pleasure of having Dawn on Infleqtion's board. She brings decades of experience leading technical organizations at the highest level of government and industry. Dawn asked me not to eulogize her, so I'll keep this very, very, very short. And we'll just maybe focus on one area of Dawn's incredibly impressive background, and that is her time at the CIA, where she led the Directorate of Science and Technology, and interestingly drove its first major restructuring in 57 years, which delivered global state-of-the-art capabilities. Colloquially, and this is pretty interesting, Dawn was known as Q for those James Bond fans out there. And Dawn, I am still waiting on my laser watch and Aston Martin with an ejection seat. I really do need them to perform my job. So, Laura. So Laura is many things, but she was actually the former chief of staff at Infleqtion, and we're lucky to still have her as advisor. But before that, she was a case officer and a chief of base for the CIA. And having spoken with Laura, Laura has seen some stuff and was at the tip of the spear, keeping us all safe. And Laura will have a lot of interesting things to talk about from your perspective. And finally, Dr. Chris Powell. Dr. Powell is the chief scientist and fellow at SAIC, where he leads and oversees the engineering of complex, distributed, high-performance, and quantum systems for various clients and domains, including defense, national security, health, and energy. Dr. Powell is working really closely with us as the tip of the spear for getting quantum into the national security conversation. Okay. So, and for those of you who I have not yet met, I'm Matt Kinsella. I'm the CEO of Infleqtion, and today I will be the CQO, the Chief Question Officer of this panel. So, let's dive in. We're gonna have three broad-based topics that we're gonna cover. And the first one is the threats and challenges that keep national security professionals up at night. So we'll start with that one. And then we're gonna talk about how quantum can help guard against those threats. Then finally, we will talk about what it takes to accelerate solutions from the lab to the field. Sound good?
Sounds
okay. Let's start with the threats and challenges. Dawn, what is one of the greatest national security vulnerabilities that keeps you up at night?
So there's a great quote, this is going to be surprising if you were hoping for a technical answer, by Carl Sagan that says, "We have made society critically reliant on advanced science and technology, and most nobody understands it." And this is the recipe for disaster. So the thing I worry about most, I'm involved in a number of these kinds of things that are changing kind of the future, is the lack of critical thinking skills combined with technical literacy across the board from a societal perspective. I think that that, in fact, comprises a possible path to disaster. And I think just raising that technical literacy across the board, but also critical thinking skills, is absolutely essential to be able to create the policy to actually implement this great new technology that's coming at us faster than we ever anticipated. So unusual answer for a technologist probably, but. it's tough right now.
And on that note, just Laura, if we think about that in the context of counter UAVs, what's needed to help guard against them, and what gives us a definitive advantage in detecting and neutralizing both drone swarms and drone swarms and individual drone attacks?
Yeah, going back to the question of keeping you up at night as well. I mean, if any of you have seen the amazing drone performances coming out of China, rather than fireworks these days, they're putting on drone swarms. It's beautiful, but it's also incredibly frightening, and I would say that certainly keeps me up at night. So how to counter that? I mean, you think about precision timing being so critical, and being able to really understand how these devices are interacting with each other, how quickly they can communicate, and how precisely that communication has to be with a timing aspect in order to make those drones perform in the way that they are. I think quantum plays a very important role and will play a much more important role in the development of these technologies, and also detecting different drone swarms as well. And detecting, when you think beyond drones, you think about hypersonics and all the other types of very scary technologies out there. Everything points towards quantum as being one of the ultimate solutions.
Mm-hmm. Let's stick on the precision timing and the Golden Dome threads. And Dr. Powell, as you've been thinking about the solutions that are going to be needed to be implemented to have Golden Dome do what it wants to do, shoot down hypersonic missiles, but also in the context of drone swarms and other types of attacks, how do you think about what needs to be implemented to enable those capabilities?
Kind of two whacks at that tree. The first one being where the device physics or the phenomenology are difficult. So it's like subsurface, space, things like that. You try to get a radio signal from point A to point B. You try to understand something that's underwater or in space in an environment where you need to be rad hard and things like that. Those are areas that need dramatic improvement given some of the timings you talked about and things like that. The other aspect is where, from a computer science perspective, we would call them NP hard or NP complete problems, where there's a lot of exponential degradation in the normal computation that's needed to grok the data in a mission environment for domain awareness, command and control, courses of action. And now when you consider a bad day scenario where you've got overwhelming UAS, hypersonic, ICBM, and it flew out of my head. Drones. Yeah. Well, I mentioned that as well. The basic point being that also they're subjected to a lot of decoys, and so the need to be able to sort those things out. The environment itself is inherently unpredictable, but it is modelable, and yet the amount of time you have to process end to end is extremely short. And so those types of environments we don't do very well in when we take a hard look at those things. And what we have found with both quantum algorithms and better quantum sensing, better quantum computation, we can take as many as 3 to 4 orders of magnitude out of wall clock time, and as many as add 5 to 8 orders of magnitude in precision and accuracy. When you do that, you're returning the mission back to the user, and those types of phenomena is what we're really trying to, work on through our increased, quantum leverage as well.
You maybe already answered the question, but I am curious just on the point I made at the beginning of multiple threats converging, and you mentioned hypersonics combined with swarms of drone attacks. What convergence of threats do you actually find the most concerning that you think about and keeps you up? Maybe it's those two, or maybe it's a different convergence.
Well, it's kind of in that multi-domain setting, certainly, but then it's also adding in the cyber dimension, the electronic warfare dimension, the GPS denial, spectrum denial, these types of things. You mix all of that together, and now you have a really, really hard problem. And being able to work around that, both in terms of physics as well as in the type of computation you bring, is extremely important, and something that becomes a threshold, again, for really being able to handle that mission, quite well.
Yeah, I would add, when we look at China specifically, the rapid buildup of their nuclear arsenal, it is unprecedented what we're seeing. It hasn't happened since the arms race between the US and the Soviets. And then you think about their hypersonic capability and all the ICBM silos that they're building as well, just how quickly they could deliver one of those weapons to a target, and then how important it is to be able to detect those launches at the early phase rather than once they get up into space. And I see a huge role for sensing and computing to converge around that detection.
Agree completely, yes.
And just to the point on how little time you have to actually make a decision and act, the synchronization that's needed to take out a hypersonic missile coming at us, it's picosecond level, and truly that you need quantum tech to get down to that level.
Yes, one of the, if you consider, for example, in traditional computation, such as a weather forecast or something, I project out, 3 to 7 days. After 3 days, the forecast is only 35% accurate. If I'm trying to plan out my magazine to deal with a really bad day scenario, 35% accuracy is not helpful. I need to keep that much closer to 100%. And in that type of an environment, we really need to apply quantum technology to be able to get that, which helps from 2 angles. First of all, I can grok the probability space much better, but then I can also increase the accuracy and correctness of what it is I'm doing, so I can act with, not blowing through my magazine as much in that kind of a circumstance. Again, very, very necessary in those types of threat environments.
And if I can pick up on that, I think we create mental models as engineers, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if I think about space, we do LEO, GEO, HEO, and we have expertise in those areas, but we don't talk to each other very much. If I think about Golden Dome, right, ballistic missile, hyper, like we put things in categories. We do the same thing in spectrum, right? Like there's something magical about UV, different than IR, different than microwaves. And very often what we found is that people who think more broadly than that discover ways to take advantage of us, because they would never do that, right? And we do it as engineers as well, and I think we have to be cognizant of that going forward, because this merging means that, if I'm 15 hertz higher than what we define officially as the UV spectrum, then that's somebody else's area, right? And that kind of thinking is what is going to get us in trouble long term, and that's why I think computing at this scale and sensing at this scale gives us new opportunities, because it works across all of these categories. But we have to get to the mental model, this is back to my critical thinking skills and technical understanding, to say, here's where we have an opportunity, because other people are operating in those same stovepipes in terms of their mental models.
Very good.
On a mental model note, when I first heard of the concept of the Golden Dome, I thought, this seems like pie in the sky. Why would we ever need this here in the US? Of course, it makes sense. Iron Dome in Israel, they have people shooting rockets at them all the time, and it's been very important for them. But I feel like that mental model was wrong, because this became very real very quickly. and so I'm just really curious, how do you all think about Golden Dome, and how necessary is it? It's just on they would never do that. That was kind of always my mental model. But clearly there's plenty of people who don't agree with that. And Laura, to your point, that the rapidity with which the nuclear arsenal is being built up, what's the probability we actually need to deploy a system like Golden Dome?
Well, certainly North Korea has demonstrated that they're perhaps willing and working to be able to employ something against us, right? I think you can just read the news and see that. I think what's really interesting is the guy in charge of Golden Dome, General Gutlein, has said, what I'm going to concentrate on is the command and control network, because it's not, he believes we have largely the technical sensor capability that we need, and even the response, many of the response capabilities. What we haven't done is this integration, right? Is like, I have all these stovepipes that probably are very effective in the particular scenario they were designed to address. But to do a Golden Dome, you've got to integrate all of that and do it in a way that it's happening at speed, at scale. That's a huge vision, and kind of, I think, regardless of the outcome there, I think we're going to learn a ton of stuff that will be useful to us in the long term.
I think whether you call it Golden Dome or something else, the key is the multi-domain aspect of it, and the idea of being able to handle every warfighting domain, land, sea, air, and space, and cyber, as well as any echelon of activity, any type of threat, is what's important. So to get that CJAD C2 aspect to it, next gen command and control, cross-domain, multi-domain, and deal with, time to the action that you need, whatever the effect is, kinetic energy, cyber or anything else. That's what's important. And Golden Dome is perhaps the most vivid example of how those threats can really create something terrible for us. But the multi-domain aspect also reinforces that and is part of the general synthesis that we need to be able to get to.
When you look at deterrence theory and escalation, sort of the escalation ladder and escalation dominance, thank goodness we haven't used nuclear weapons in a very, very long time. That does not mean that it couldn't happen, that another country would not attempt to use that, especially when you think about the build out of tactical nuclear weapons, which are much smaller. They don't have the same, large effect. So when you think about these systems and just the incredible amount of money, taxpayer dollars, to be clear, that are being spent on them, you really hope that it's worth it. And I think when you look at the pace of build out of nuclear arsenals, specifically China, there's a reason why we're responding this way. And it's because we don't ever want to see one of those weapons used. And this is a really strong sort of stance to have and way to ensure that.
Well, let's switch to how, and we've sort of already dabbled in this, but first define the threats. Now let's talk about how quantum can maybe more specifically help, which we've already kind of dabbled in. Let me zoom back out to a more broad-based question, and Dawn, back to you. What is the one quantum-enabled capability that you hope will fundamentally change the landscape of national security? I have a hunch I know what your answer is going to be, but I'm actually curious.
Yeah, my answer is not going to be quantum breaking cryptography, a quantum computer breaking cryptography. I think that's important, but I actually think there's a lot more opportunity in quantum remote sensing. The distances that we can operate at potentially, as well as the detection levels that we can see from that distance, I think fundamentally change the way that we prosecute any kind of operation in the future, whether it's clandestine or whether it's all-out war. And it goes back to what Chris has been talking about and what the panel's been about, is the level of complexity. It won't be that we don't see things, it's that we fail to interpret and act on them in time to do something, right? And I think that's the opportunity. I think we have to really fundamentally rethink our whole sensor-to-shooter timelines and how we think about integrating all of that information in order to be effective. And also, honestly, what human in the loop means, right? And how much is agentic and how much is actually like somebody saying, yeah, that I can verify that association is actually a correlation, to be geeky for a second.
Yeah, there's a really good quote, I don't remember who said it, but intelligence is quickness in seeing things as they are. And that's ultimately what we're trying to do, is collapse that decision loop and see things more quickly. And we must, because our adversaries are doing that, and we cannot afford to fall behind.
Yeah, I think, ultimately quantum, because it gives us significant increases in speed and data quality and other things, it actually helps us fulfill in what is becoming a much more difficult environment the DoD's original mission, now Department of War, to prevent or defeat the enemy's will to fight. If I can get left of launch, if I can interfere with those OODA loops, if I can get in the way of what's going on, I prevent these types of actions, and I give people more time and capacity to solve problems versus revert to these types of awful situations that could arise. And I think that's the real opportunity. We don't have to, rely on as much human in the loop. We can increase the level of autonomy on the warfighting side with, then allowing the humans to do their job the way they should, So I think that's part of the real opportunity by, through quantum computing, through quantum sensing, increasing data quality, accuracy, precision, timeliness, and then, just the capacity of computation we need to get the mission executed.
I want to go back to Golden Dome for a minute, and we've talked high level about where quantum might play a role, but if we imagine a real world scenario where a hypersonic missile's detected, it's coming, actually we start before that, right? But, let's imagine a real world scenario. Dr. Powell, we'll start with you. Where will quantum play a role in that process? From detection of the launch to interception.
Right, yes, and, right?
Yeah.
So anything from pre-launch in terms of identifying the types of activity that's occurring, before the button is pushed, towards any, during ascent to flight, during, traversal, all that, being able to understand exactly what you've got in front of you. Part of the problem also when you're dealing with a threat like that is some of the traditional sensors and computation that we've got can't really deal with it. So quantum gives us the ability to deal with that at speed, which is very important. And now I'm getting decision time back into the hands of the commander, which is what's key. When you consider where these threats could come from and how fast they could hit resources, not necessarily continental U.S., but elsewhere, the amount of time you have is extremely short. Quantum can give us access to that entire pre-launch to intercept, capability and make something happen.
So what might those actual quantum sensors look like, and where might they be to detect that pre-launch activity?
Right, well, fortunately, you happen to have one at Infleqtion. But the basic point is I can take a look at a sensor that is magnetometric, gravimetric, interferometric. I'll hopefully pronounce that word correctly. Yep. But the basic point is there's different phenomena that a threat like that is exerting on the Earth, on its magnetic field, yep, the electric field of the atmosphere around it, and other things. Quantum sensors give us the ability to see that, yep, and to understand it much faster than traditional sensors do. Yep. That, to me, is what the sensor ends up looking like. And then the idea is proliferated enough that you can detect those things and then also have the right level of computation behind it.
So now we've pre-detected it, and now it's heading towards us, the hypersonic missiles en route. Where's quantum playing a role now? And we've talked a little bit about how there's actually been some potentially quantum advantage shown in the calculations with computers to do some of that work that needs to be done. And then how does timekeeping and other sensors play into all this?
Yeah, timekeeping is a perfect idea. We've always got to know what time it is, and we've got to have that synchronized among all assets, and people would be perhaps amazed at how little of that there sometimes is, mm-hmm, and how the time itself can be kind of really out of whack from an accuracy standpoint or a precision. And so the idea of being able to be lockstep on that is very important. But the basic point, I think, that quantum gives us is, again, to return time back to the decision maker. What is the mission outcome that we're looking for? What are the courses of action? What is the right decision? And allow that person to be able to make that decision correctly with the right data in hand to do it. Today I might have to spend more of my magazine speculatively in order to, I think there's something in this general space. Mm-hmm. Now, if I can really narrow it down from a heat map perspective and say it's right here, then I have a much better, capability to take care of things.
I think to go back and be geeky just for a second, because we are technical here, with the new quantum-informed software, we are actually addressing with GPUs problems that were identified as NP incomplete, right? Mm-hmm. And I think if you think about that for the computer scientists in the audience, what we've discovered is that you can have much longer contextual windows than is available currently in LLMs, for example. And that can be optimized for the particular problem set in terms of how memory is used and how actually the computation is done in such a way that things that were not calculable before are now actually calculable and calculable in time windows that are actually relevant. That gives a lot more time back to make hard decisions. And the other thing that I'll pick up on is, very often watching human behavior is the way to detect that there's about to be a physical act of some sort, right? And thinking about, we could tell there was going to be Chinese unrest if there was an increase in the procurement of umbrellas and motorcycle helmets because they used water cannons, and so the Chinese people would know that they were probably going to come for them, and who would have guessed that as a correlation, right? I'm just going to use that as an unclassified example of the kinds of things you might be looking for at the individual level that then now you can actually potentially calculate so that you can get left of boom.
Yeah, that's actually back to the Walmart kind of data warehouse example, right, where the rack comes out when it's raining and there's umbrellas and bananas on it because there's a huge correlation between bananas being sold and umbrellas. I just found that to be hilarious.
It's very funny.
But these great signal-to-noise ratio things that we don't generally think of are now we can actually do the math, yes, right, potentially.
Laura, let's talk quickly about GPS, mm-hmm, and probably more importantly, the denial of GPS. And how, if so, how quantum can play a role in having assured PNT in the absence of GPS.
Yeah, I think we take GPS extremely for granted. It is quite fragile if you really think about it. There's always been this thought that if you're in space, all the GPS satellites up there, that an adversary wouldn't necessarily do something in space because it would also degrade their capabilities as well. I think with some of the advances we're seeing on EMPs, electromagnetic pulse, some of the more precision space-based capabilities that are being developed, is it possible to take out GPS? Yes, I think it very well could be if a country actually decides they want to get to that point. And then, how are you going to navigate?
Yep.
There's so many things that depend on it. Logistics for the military, just our own financial systems, going to an ATM and getting cash out. So many things rely on GPS. So we have to be able to replace that in some way and have backup. And quantum, is ultimately the way to do that. When I think about it from a former, with a CIA hat on, I mean, my whole world was trying to avoid any signal possible. I was out trying to be completely under the radar, and any device you're carrying around has some signal on it.
Yep.
And everything nowadays is connected to GPS.
Yep.
And we become more and more reliant upon it. And just from a national security perspective, we're racing against time. How can we still operate without GPS? Because one, from someone like me, we don't want to emit a signal, but two, we know how fragile it is. It can go down, and we must have a backup.
And when it's GPS, a PNT system, position, navigation, timing, but I think I didn't know until recently, and a lot of people don't know, is it's really a lowercase p, a lowercase n, a capital T, right? The timing is arguably the most valuable service that comes down to us from GPS, and a lot of the other services that we use for it are derivatives of that timing. But when you think about the national infrastructure that relies on GPS to synchronize, whether that's the electricity grid, the RF networks, the financial markets, it is very much a single point of failure that's increasingly susceptible to jamming, spoofing, or in the extreme case, destruction.
Yep.
It is scary. So let's talk about how we get quantum out into the field. And Dawn, going back to your first point, what kept you up at night? It was really a mindset fear, right? But what maybe that's the answer, but what's the single biggest barrier to getting quantum technologies into the hands of the military operators who need it?
Well, this is where people like us, and I mean Infleqtion, have to figure out how to get to manufacturing at scale, right? I think that's what we owe, and it has to be able to operate in austere environments reliably. And everybody's, and it's not just us, but I mean the quantum industry writ large, everybody's working on it, but I think that's the first thing that has to happen. And concurrently, we have to stop talking about quantum as only a quantum computer and acknowledge all of these other things that we have to do so that we can start working the CONOPS and the .mil-PF that all of you understand really well in terms of getting it into very capable soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines' hands.
Chris,
Yes.
do you have anything to add on that?
Right.
That was a very holistic answer, but Chris Lord, if you have anything to add.
The mission integration component, I think, is incredibly important.
Yep.
It's easy enough to talk to almost anyone about a shiny object and how that can perhaps return mission value. It's quite another to then say, this is credibly going to improve my mission in a time frame that I can use with technology that I can use. And can be deployed. And I think being able to establish that credibility and to be able to get something into the hands of the warfighter in an operationally relevant context is what's critical to advancing quantum technology. What's been very neat is over the last year especially, I think especially for government-related work, we've seen a sea change in understanding of quantum as an interesting out there technology and something that's actually operationally relevant. And I think so, the time is now to start, or really to have those mission integration dialogues, increase manufacturing readiness, leverage your high technology readiness that's already there and get these things working, in a lot of context, from comms to GPS to timing to computing and, mission as well.
And Laura, you've worked on both sides of the equation,
Yeah.
both in government and in deep tech. How do you think about the answer to that question?
I think we have to put our money where our mouth is. And the government, wants to do more in quantum, and I think we have to really be thoughtful and creative about new financial models for funding these technologies that are really hard and have these manufacturing challenges. But it's doable. If you look at the MP Minerals deal, which is a critical minerals company, the US just invested a lot of money into that. And that's to take these technologies and really advance them quickly, put them in the hands of people who need them. But we really have to figure out how to go from prototype to production very rapidly. It's possible. Mm-hmm. It's just a matter of, do you have the will? And from the government side, I think one thing that is really critical that I found is, sometimes when you're in the government, you think people on the outside, they're just out making money. They're just out to line their pocketbook. And there really are people in industry that want to build these technologies because they see it as a way to make the world safer and better. And I think just from a government mindset, understanding that and really realizing and thinking about it as they're making decisions is very important.
Well, on that note, we'll bring it to a close. Laura, Dawn, I've had the privilege of working with you for over 5 years, and Chris more recently, but it is really imperative that we get this technology out into the world because there are huge national security implications, and thank you for all of your help in trying to make that happen. So thank you all. I appreciate it.